Okay. When Bilbo opened his eyes, he wondered if he had, for it was just as dark as when he had them shut. No one was anywhere near him. Just imagine his fright. He could hear nothing, he could see nothing, and he could feel nothing except the stone of the floor. Very slowly he got up and groped about on all floors until he touched the wall of the tunnel, but neither up nor down he could not find anything, nothing at all, no sign of goblins, no sign of dwarves. His head was swimming, and he was far from certain even of the direction which he'd been going in when he'd had his fall. He guessed as well as he could, as he crawled along for a good way, until suddenly his hand met what felt like a tiny gold ring of cold metal lying on the floor of the tunnel. Well, he didn't know it was gold. It was a turning point in his career, but he did not know it. He put the ring in his pocket almost without thinking. Certainly it did not seem of any particular use at the moment. He did not go much further, but sat down on the cold floor and gave himself up to complete miserableness for a long while. He thought of himself frying bacon and eggs in his own kitchen at home, for he could feel inside that it was high time for some meal or other, but it only made him miserabler. He could not think what to do, nor could he think what had happened, or why he'd been left behind, or why, if he had been left behind, the goblins had not caught him, or even why his head was so sore. The truth was that he'd been lying quiet, out of sight and out of mind, in a very dark corner for a long while. After some time he felt for his pipe. It was not broken, and that was something. Then he felt for his pouch, and there was some tobacco in it, and that was something more. Then he felt for matches, and he could not find any at all, and that shattered his hopes completely. Just as well for him, as he agreed when he came to his senses. Goodness knows what the striking of matches and the smell of tobacco would have brought on him out of dark holes in that horrible place. Still, at that moment he felt very crushed, but in slapping all his pockets and feeling around for his matches, his hand came on the hilt of his little sword, the little dagger that he'd got from the trolls, and that he'd quite forgotten. Not fortunately had the goblins noticed it, as he wore it inside his breeches. Now he drew it out, and it shone pale and dim, and before him, in his eyes. So it was an elvish blade too, he thought, and goblins are not very near, and yet not far enough. But somehow he was comforted. It was rather splendid to be wearing a blade made in Gondolin for the Gondolin Wars, of which so many songs had sung, and also he had noticed that such weapons made a great impression on goblins that came upon them suddenly. Go back, he thought. No good at all. Go sideways. Impossible. Go forward. The only thing to do. On we go. So he got up and trotted along with his little sword held in front of him, and one hand feeling the wall, and his heart all of a pitter and a patter. Now certainly Bilbo was in what was called a tight place, but you must remember it's not quite so tight for him as it would have been for you and me. Hobbits are not quite like ordinary people, and after all their holes are rather nice cheery places and properly aired, quite different from the tunnels of the goblins. Still they are more used to tunnelling than we are, and they do not easily lose their sense of direction underground. Not when their heads have recovered from being bumped. Also, they can move very quietly, and hide easily, and recover wonderfully from falls and bruises, and they have a fund of wisdom and wise sayings that men have mostly never heard of or forgotten long ago. I should have not liked to have been in Mr. Baggins's place at the time. All the same, the tunnel seemed to have no end. All he knew that it was still going down pretty steadily, and keeping in the same direction in spite of a twist and a turn or two. There were passages leading off to the side every now and then, and he knew by the glimmer of his sword, or could feel by the hand on the wall. Of these he took no notice, except to hurry past, for fear of goblins or half-imagined dark things coming out of them. On and on he went, and down, and still he heard no sound of anything, except the occasional whir of a bat in his ears, which startled him at first, until it became too frequent to bother about. I do not know how long he kept on like this, hating to go on, not daring to stop, on and on, until he was tireder and tired. It seemed like all the way to tomorrow, and over to the days beyond. Suddenly, without any warning, he trotted splash into water. Ugh, it was icy cold. That pulled him up sharp and short. He did not know whether it was just a pool in the path, or the edge of an underground stream that crossed the passage, or the brink of a deep, dark subterranean lake. The sword was hardly shining at all. He stopped and he could hear, and he listened. Drops, drip, drip, dripping from an unseen roof into the water below, but there seemed no other sort of sound. So it was a pool or a lake, and not an underground river, he thought. Still, he did not dare to wade out into the darkness. He could not swim, and he thought too of nasty, slimy things, with big bulging blind eyes wriggling in the water. There were strange things living in the pools and lakes in the heart of the mountains, fish whose fathers swam in goodness only knows how many years ago, and never swam out again, while their eyes grew bigger and bigger and bigger from trying to see in the blackness. And also there were other things more slimy than fish. Even in the tunnels and the caves the goblins had made for themselves, there were other things living unbeknown to them, that had sneaked in from the outside to lie in the dark. Some of these caves go too far back in the beginnings, to ages before the goblins, who only widened them and joined them up with passages, and the original owners are still there, in odd corners, slinking and nosing about. Deep down there by the dark water lived old Gollum, a slimy creature, small. I don't know where he came from, nor who or what he was. He was Gollum, as dark as darkness, except for two big round pale eyes in his thin face. He had a little boat, and he rowed about quite quietly on the lake, for lake it was, wide and deep, and deadly cold. He paddled it with large feet dangling over the sides, but never made a ripple,